Well, the Gillard government has released its mid-year economic roadmap for delivering its long-promised budget surplus. Company tax, the baby bonus, private health insurance and research funding were the main targets in a new round of spending cuts, totalling nearly $16.5 billion over 4 years. The cutbacks are the consequences of another significant write-down in Commonwealth receipts. $22 billion over the forward estimates, due mainly to lower company tax collections, falling commodity prices and therefore a shortfall in the mining tax. It was Finance Minister Penny Wong's job to find those savings. The government says will push the budget back into the black by June 30 next year by a shade over $1 billion. The coalition says all the government's done is cook the books rather than come up with the right savings measures. And that worries Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey, who we spoke to earlier.
You know, they put together a hodgepodge document like yesterday, fiddle with the numbers and try and reassure everyone that, look, it's all going to be fine. Don't look here. There's a train crash here. Just move on. It does leave me sleepless. If I'm to become the Treasurer, I keep thinking to myself, this mob is just making life harder and harder every day.
Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey speaking to us earlier. Well, Finance Minister Penny Wong joins us in the Parliament House studio now. Minister, good morning. Welcome to breakfast.
Good to be with you, Fran.
You're giving Joe Hockey sleepless nights. He's so worried about your budget strategy.
Well, if Joe Hockey is so worried, perhaps he could do something other than rail against savings measures the government's taking, and perhaps he could offer an alternative. I mean, the problem for...
Well, he's got alternatives. He said you should dump your school kids bonus, for instance.
Oh, well, that's not going to fill the revenue hole that we've been presented with. The reality is Joe's turning into a bit of a poser, I have to say, Fran. He beats his chest about the ending the age of entitlement. Does anyone remember that speech? The importance of ending the age of entitlement. But every time he's presented with a savings measure, he rails against it, as does Tony Abbott. Now, it just doesn't add up. Unfortunately, the only way you bring a budget back to surplus over the forward estimates is to make, in this environment where you've got a global economy softening and therefore revenue softening, the only way you do it is by making the savings such as the ones the government's made.
So is that the dominant strategy then? If we look at strategy, and as I said, Joe Hockey's worried about your budget strategy, in this environment, as you say, is that your strategy, to cut until you reach a surplus? Is that it?
Our strategy is to run the right budget policy, the right fiscal policy for the economic circumstances. And what we have at the moment is an economy growing around trend, not as strongly as we anticipate at budget, but still faster than any other advanced economy. We've got low unemployment and we've got a pipeline of investment. Now, in those circumstances, it is absolutely the right fiscal strategy to bring the budget back to surplus and over the forward estimates, and that's what the government's doing.
Is this it? No more cuts? I mean, you know, we can't say what's going to happen to the global outlook, but the signs aren't great. How low will you go?
Well, I mean, you're right. You can't say with any accuracy, any certainty exactly what will happen. Certainly, obviously, the global economy softened since the budget, but what we can say is we'll always run the right fiscal policy for the economic circumstances.
What does that mean? If the right fiscal policy is to abandon your promise of a surplus,
well,
will you do that?
I don't think...
I know you've been asked this before, but it does seem as though the language is changing a little.
Well, we've just handed down a budget update which has us tracking to surplus, and that's the most recent budget update, and that's how budgeting works. You hand down budgets and budget updates. I think
budgeting doesn't work, it seems, because we keep getting these forecasts and these budgets based on the forecast, and then they have to get revised down. I mean, Joe Hockey was talking about in the last couple of budgets, he's claimed your assumptions are heroic. And it does seem as though these are heroic assumptions again, because you're still talking about strong economic growth and stable commodity prices.
Well, this is how the real world in which treasurers and ministers for finances have to operate, and that is a real world where sometimes the global economy doesn't do what you want it to do. I don't think anybody would have said, this could have given you a blueprint 2 years ago as to what would happen in the global economy. Certainly before the global financial crisis, I don't think anyone could have. There are uncertainties out there. The job of responsible governments is to do what we're doing, which is respond to those circumstances appropriately and give the Reserve Bank room to move, and we've seen the benefit of that. We've seen the interest rate cuts. We've seen that families on average mortgages are paying less than they would have but for this strategy and the Reserve Bank's decisions.
And I know you'll say you can't get ahead of yourself because we don't know how how far it's going to go, but I guess can you reassure Australians that you will not hang on to your promise of a budget surplus whatever the cost?
Well, the reassurance I would give is that this government has always run the right budget policy, the right fiscal policy for the times. We did that in the global financial crisis, and remember, Joe Hockey railed against that too. He railed against the stimulus, which has ensured this economy will grow faster than any major advanced economy in the year to come, against the stimulus which ensured hundreds of thousands of Australians stayed in work. I mean, if you go to Europe or even have a look at America, and you'll see what that large-scale unemployment does to a society and to an economy.
You're listening to RM Breakfast. Our guest this morning in the Parliament House studio is the Finance Minister Penny Wong. Minister, more than half of your $16.5 billion in savings will be made up by shifting 10,500 larger companies from quarterly tax instalments to monthly instalments. The government wants to discuss these changes with the business community. Isn't it usually a better idea to discuss the changes before you announce them and impose them?
Well, look, consultation is important, but you also have budget decisions, and regrettably you can't always consult on decisions you want to put into a budget ahead of time. That's the reality. I'd make a couple of points about the company tax change. Companies aren't being asked to pay more tax. In fact, the only party that's asking companies to pay more tax is actually Tony Abbott's Liberal Party, who, as you know, want to put a levy on large companies to pay for their very generous paid parental leave scheme. The second point I'd make is we are giving a lot of notice. So the first tranche of change doesn't start to January 2014, which of course is only the largest companies. And we're also only asking them to do what they already do in relation to the GST, which is to pay monthly.
And you say, and the Treasurer made the point, that we're not asking companies to pay more tax, it's not new tax, we're just paying it differently. But there's no magic pudding here. If you're getting $8 billion more for your bottom line, business is paying it, and they will feel that pain. It's not going to be a painless change, is it?
Oh, well, they aren't being asked to pay more tax. They're being asked to pay tax at a different time. And obviously that has a particular effect in each year because some payments which would be in the subsequent year would come back into the previous year.
And it's also going to have a massive increase in red tape, isn't it? For years now, you've been promising business to relieve the red tape burden.
Well, they already pay their GST, remember, on a monthly basis. And as I said, we're very keen to consult with the business community about how we can put this in place in a way that is smooth and causes least disruption.
And what if they say you can't? Will you back off it?
Oh, well, it is a budget decision, and I'm confident we can work through these details with the business community. But again, I say this: we've seen a lot of criticism from the other side of politics. They're the ones that are actually suggesting a tax hike.
The Treasury has downgraded the mining tax forecasts. It's gone from $13.4 billion in the May budget to $9.1 billion over 4 years. That's how much it will bring in. In this year alone, it's been shaved by $1 billion. How sure can you be about those figures, considering the big miners only submitted their first instalments yesterday? These numbers could be already out of date.
Well, we factored in some pretty substantial reductions in the terms of trade into the budget update. So that is the prices of what we sell to the world compared to the prices of what we buy from the world. And if you look at this budget update, there's a much greater reduction in the terms of trade than we anticipated a budget, although we already did anticipate it. As you rightly said, commodity prices have come off. We've seen the iron ore spot price drop. We've seen prices for coal exports drop. Some of those have come back a bit. So we have factored that into our budget. But you're right, it's affecting not only company tax but also resource rent taxes.
So is it possible that some of the measures that you've already factored in to be paid for by this revenue won't be able to be paid for?
But all of those measures are already factored into the budget, and the budget bottom line shows us returning to surplus and increasing that surplus over the forward estimates.
These cuts of these won't be painless, and business has already said the changes will hurt them. What about the cuts to the baby bonus and the private health insurance rebate? Joe Hockey pointed out earlier that even many low-income Australians have private health insurance, and this will cost them. This is going to add to the cost of living pressures on many Australians.
Look, we're very aware of cost of living pressures, which is why we've done things like introduce a paid parental leave scheme, introduce the school kids bonus, and of course the tax cuts associated with the clean energy package, which Mr Hockey wants to take back from low-income Australians. I'll make a couple of quick points. In terms of the baby bonus, we do recognise that this is not a popular measure, but we are the government that's introduced things like the paid parental leave scheme and the school kids bonus, which obviously reflects an understanding of cost of living pressures on families. And the reality is we do have to ensure this system is sustainable over time. In terms of the private health insurance rebate, this really comes back to sustainability. Ultimately, this rebate, if we hadn't before the changes the government was making, this and the last budget changes, the majority of Medicare or medical benefits expenditure by 2050 would have been taken up by this rebate. That's not sustainable, and we have to run a sustainable health system so our children get the same benefits we do.
And talking of sustainability, just finally, there was no money in the update for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. That is a big promise, a popular promise. Joe Hockey says you like making big promises, but you can't pay for them. He sees a train wreck on the way. When will you make a firm funding commitment?
Well, Mr Hockey has candidates. For example, last weekend in the seat of Hindmarsh in Adelaide, the Liberal candidate was handing out a leaflet saying the Liberals were committed to a National Disability Insurance Scheme. So if Joe Hockey wants to apply that test to us, where is his funding strategy? The Treasurer's made clear we'll have more to say about our approach on the National Disability Insurance Scheme at the next budget. We are very committed to this. We recognise we will require more hard decisions, but this is the right thing to do for the country.
Can the nation afford it?
I don't think the nation cannot afford to do better by people with a disability and their families.
Penny Wong, thank you very much for joining us on Breakfast.
Good to be with you.